Hello everybody, Floppy Waffle 69 here, and I am coming at you with yet another ship review. This time the Tier 9 Pan-Asian Heavy Cruiser, the Tianjin, I believe is how you say it. Now what is this ship? What does this ship do well? If you're looking at this ship right out of the gates, you probably go, I know what that ship is. That looks like a Tier 9 Soviet, the Riga. You're absolutely correct. Your eyes do not deceive you. This is indeed a Riga. But there are some subtle changes and differences between the two ships that I'm going to be going over here in this video today. And I'm going to be telling you about this ship because actually I rather enjoy this ship a lot. I have played countless games in this ship and I am doing very well in her. And I think it's a ship that not a lot of people know about. Just like the video yesterday in the Sun Yat Sen, I don't think a lot of people see these ships or know about these ships. And especially on the North American server where I'm located, I don't think Pan-Asian ships are as popular as other servers. Could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. I'm sure we could go to look at the server statistics and you can see the popularity of the ships. But anyways, I digress. Now, what is this ship? Basically, you are a Riga hull that has improved plating on your deck. You go from 35 millimeters to 40 millimeters, which is actually important, and I will go over why. You drop your 12-kilometer radar, so you basically drop team utility, so to speak, but instead you pick up this Bungo spotter plane-ish gimmick, which is going to reduce your shell dispersion by 10% and increase your range by plus 10%, basically turning you into quite the little sniper. When this spotter plane is active, it is very much a Stalingrad, Petropavlovsk kind of vibe. Your shells are more pinpoint and on target, and you are definitely capable of sniping enemy citadels from range. And that is what this ship does very well. Again, though, you are basically reliant, not solely, but in those accurate salvos on your spotter plane gimmick, whereas other ships like the Riga gets more accurate the closer he gets to the target, so to speak. So again, a little bit more consumable reliant of a ship, but realistically speaking, identical statistics to that of the Riga in multiple categories. I'm talking the survivability, the detection by sea, the torpedo protection, the AP performance is a little bit different, and your HE performance is a little bit different, but that basically comes down to the reload of the ship. The reload of the Riga is going to be a second faster, which is going to translate to higher AP DPM and higher HE DPM, though take that with a pinch of salt. You just reload it 1 second faster, so not that big of a deal, right? The base dispersion values and vertical, so that's vertical and horizontal dispersion, are slightly improved. I mean, ever so slightly improved on the Tianjin, and the sigma is identical at 2.05. So realistically speaking, there aren't that many differences between the two ships. Basically, the big difference is that improved deck plating armor that you're going to be getting, and the Bungo-like spotter plane instead of the radar consumable. That is like the big change on this ship. You also get a heal, no brainer, and you get your choice of defensive AA or hydro. As you can see here, I am taking the hydroacoustic search consumable. I just think this is a more universal consumable to utilize in the game currently. Just my opinion though. Again, you do whatever you think is best, but that's what I'm going to be recommending to you guys. As you saw on my upgrades, you see I actually in the first slot I'm taking the spotter plane modification. No brainer, this ship is pretty damn reliant on this spotter plane, so why not increase the likelihood of that being up for longer duration, right? I want to make sure I have that. I also take Eye in the Sky. This is one of those ships I actually take that captain skill on, because I want to get my spotter plane up more frequently. Yes, it's not lasting as long, but that means I get it up more frequently, and I think that is a win for me. Here's a good example of the Tianjin spotter plane gimmick up and active. A Drake at 17.7 kilometers. I don't think a Riga could realistically citadel this thing as reliably, but there we go. We end up scoring a citadel, landing 4 out of our 9 shells on target. Not that bad. Speaking of the main artillery on this ship, you are packing identical 3x3 220mm guns. These guns are tested and true. They are on a lot of fan favorites ships in this game, being the Riga, the Moskva, Petropavlovsk, but the Petropavlovsk is kind of cracked. I really don't want to compare it to that. So we know what these guns are capable of doing, and especially the armor piercing. This is a very Soviet-esque ship that the, I guess, Chinese Navy go ahead and purchased or somehow acquired, whatever, same like the Sun Yat-sen, and they're going to make subtle changes to differentiate their playstyle and kind of impose their playstyle on the ship. But it's very, very similar, and it's a pretty damn good side grade too. Again, the big differences between the two is you're going to be dropping that team utility with that 12-kilometer radar that is very, very good on the Riga, and instead we're going to be picking up this Bungo spotter plane that's going to basically emphasize our main guns a little better, making us more of a more reliable sniper-esque sort of ship, which I really do enjoy. Also, the Tianjin's range is also a 1.3 kilometers better than that of the Riga, and it's actually more usable as the accuracy on the Tianjin is just flat out better, and plus the spotter plane gimmick is going to allow us to be more reliable at those ranges compared to the Riga that really turns into like you flip a coin and it lands on neither sides. You roll the die and you somehow get a 7. It's really weird what you get out of the Riga at range. Sometimes you score a citadel off a lucky hit. Other times you completely miss the ship, which is more common. It's one of those things, it's just, hey, whatever, it's the gimmick baked into the ship. It wants to play a more aggressive playstyle. The Tianjin isn't. It kind of can go more aggressive, or it can be a little bit more passive. It kind of leaves it up to the commander to choose from. Now, talking about the improved armor plating and why I think this improved deck is a little bit better. As you know, this thing does have an icebreaker just like that of the Riga. I believe the Riga has one, if I'm not mistaken. I think it does, which is basically going to allow you to shrug off a lot of enemy overmatch, especially when you close the distance, which is always a good thing. And the Riga definitely needs that. The Tianjin doesn't really need it, but hey, I'm not going to say no. But the deck armor. So you go from 35 to 40. Now, a lot of you looking at this is like, well, what is this going to do? I guess with HE shatters and penetration values. Yes, that is one big pro. You can shrug off some HE now depending on the caliber of shells. So they're going to be more reliant on just doing fire damage rather than raw pen damage on your deck. But more importantly, long range plunging fire overmatch. Those 510mm guns, I believe. So that of like the Shirokishima, the Satsuma, big guns, incomparable, we can throw into the mix. Those guns will go ahead and actually overmatch 35mm of armor. Now with this 40mm deck, there is no way, shape, or form those shells can overmatch your deck armor anymore. Matter of fact, they will ricochet, which is very nice. I mean, of course, there still is a chance of penetration, but you have a chance now. But they won't overmatch, is what I'm trying to tell you, which is a huge gimmick, air quotes, to pick up, especially because the Tianjin, you're playing at longer ranges, so you could theoretically shrug off some of these larger caliber guns that is such a problem at upper tiers in this game, as overmatch is really prevalent in the game as of late. So this is going to help you have a little bit more tankiness to your game. Now, obviously, there are still parts that can be overmatched of this ship. Obviously, the upper nose, I think it's only, 25mm, so it can go hot knife through the butter, and that still, and your ass is completely exposed. So again, take it with a pinch of salt. You are still just a cruiser, which means you are still battleship fodder. So you have to tread with caution, abuse island coverages, and hopefully your allies can go ahead and drop you a quite nice smoke screen so you can utilize that to your advantage. Now, I have 2 games to show you. I know I've been blabbering a lot about the Tianjin itself, kind of introducing what this ship is. So the background here, we are showing a very aggressive playstyle in the Tianjin, something that I think most players really don't or shouldn't do in the ship. But why not? Why not get yourself in an advantageous position where broadsides are literally forced your way? You have either the enemies have to deal with you, or they're just going to be getting absolutely chunked with armor piercing, as you saw I was doing to, was that a Richelieu or Alsace, coming in there on the sea cap. Just absolutely a menace. This ship can punish broadsides, and even if it can't citadel the ship, these 220mm guns mixed with the penetration that you're going to be finding on these guns, which is quite considerable, the ricochet angles, and the weight of the shells all combined into one with the initial speed and drag coefficient, which is going to translate to very good penetration damage, and more often than not, scoring penetrations. We see this a lot with a lot of Soviet era ships because their shell velocity is so good and their shell weight is decently heavy. They're going to translate to just flat out doing better penetration damage than most cruisers. Most cruisers could shatter for chance. The Soviets really aren't going to do that, and they take full advantage of broadsides, which is very, very nice to do and see, because I want a cruiser that, if you're going to underestimate me as a battleship and you're going to say, hey, it's just a cruiser, he can't one-shot me, he can't kill me, consecutively after what, 30 seconds, this thing's chunked you for over 17,000 damage. I mean, that is awesome. Like, that is something that battleships can't ignore. That's 17,000 HP gone. So it's one of those things that, especially if you're in a battleship player, yeah, like if you have an exposed citadel, this thing can citadel you, so you have to be careful. But if you have a turtleback or an underwater citadel, this thing can still chunk you and do that raw penetration damage, which is going to translate to you leaving game earlier than most ships could do. Okay, yes, it doesn't have the DPM. This isn't a DPM focused ship, but in my opinion, it doesn't matter. You are accurate, you are precise, you are damage over time, not damage per second or salvo. DPM focused. Like, you are a damage per salvo kind of guy, and it's going to translate, kind of play it more as like a Stalingrad, like kind of treat it like it's going to be those slower salvos that are going to correlate to more damage for you kind of ship. And that's where I find a lot of success with the Tianjin. Now, obviously, here we are into battle number 2. Again, I want to point out I am with a division mate with both these games. I apologize. It's just one of those things when I'm gathering footage for a ship, I don't really plan it out. It's just like, hey, this is a really good game. I want to showcase this. But I want to make sure I point out that I am in a division, just because that could skew some of the way the game goes, you know? So take this with a pinch of salt. Now, this is actually a really, really good game, and this game does come down to the wire, folks. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything. I know I have an occasional bit where I do spoil the games, and I do apologize for that. So I'm not going to spoil anything, so hopefully stick around and watch this one to the end, because this is truly a good game. With the Tianjin, what I wanted to do here, again, not many destroyers this game. We only have 2, and they went to either side, so I didn't want to leave the middle uncontested. And potentially you could catch ships, especially with this map. This is the Seychelles map. Ships going over to, I believe, is that the 8? C cap, B cap, one of the two. I can't remember. D cap, one of the two, going on to the far right. Sometimes you can catch broadsides of ships going that way, and that's what I hope to do here with the Tianjin. Obviously, it didn't happen. I was kind of caught off guard because there were 2 enemy battleships and this Eastern Dragon player that actually knows how to angle a ship, so good to see. I was kind of shit out of luck, and looking back at this, I think it would have been actually better and more impactful for the team if I would have just gone to the left cap and supported that side with my destroyer. But hey, what are you going to do? You live and you learn. You're not going to be perfect 100% of the time, so whatever, right? Anyways, you can kind of see that I solely use armor piercing on the ship. I will switch to HE every now and then, especially if the angle isn't appropriate for my armor piercing. But even with chunking shots and superstructure shots, because I mentioned this, on Soviet style of ships, your penetration is just so good. You can, and especially because you're more accurate, you could get away with just using armor piercing and getting flat out penetrations through superstructure and whatnot. Like, it's pretty damn reliable. So I almost solely stay with the armor piercing. I would say I'm like 90% of the time utilizing armor piercing, and only really 10% utilizing AG in the ship, just because the armor piercing is so damn good. Now, obviously, going into the high explosive, I know I kind of briefly touched on this earlier. Your damage totals are the same, but your shell weight is a little bit heavier. Not that really amounts to anything. You can still penetrate 37 millimeters of armor, and your fire chance is identical to that of the Riga at 14%. So what does this mean? That the Riga is going to get more fires per minute and just have overall better performing high explosive than your ship. Now, again, everyone knows that the Riga suffers from using HE because it has rather poor damage per minute. So if the Riga already struggles with its high explosive, and in accordance to what Wargaming is saying, what do you think about the Tianjin? It's probably going to struggle too, right? Because let's be honest, the Bungo spotter plane on this ship isn't really made for, oh, hey, let's spam HE accurately at enemy ships. No. That is basically for made for the armor piercing selectively as it wants to go and snipe enemy citadels. That's what it's made for. Now, I have utilized it with the high explosive when shooting enemy destroyers. I want to make sure that all my HE shells land on an enemy DD so I can get them out of the game quicker. I have done that, and I actually highly recommend you do that. It's one of those things that when the ship gets spotted, immediately click your U key, and boom, you get the bonus on your ship. Would not be a bad idea or a good tactic to utilize on this ship, because you're going to be able to translate to more shells landed on target. Now, if you have rather poor aim, then maybe you don't want to utilize the spotter plane, because sometimes the poor accuracy can compensate for our poor aim. Sometimes we've seen this on ships like the Musashi, for example. Sometimes that horrendous dispersion actually works in our favor. Same with like the Kremlin at range. Lo and behold, because you have 457mm guns, it actually translates to a shell hit and more damage dealt, because if someone has shitty aim, I call it the compensation shells, go ahead and laser guide themselves into the enemy citadel at times, which is rather rare. Now, there's an example of overmatch up the ass. That is not the first time you will see this, and most certainly won't be the last time you see this. One thing to keep in mind is when this spotter plane is active, you can just get away with shooting your third turret, which has horrendous gun firing angles just like the Riga. So basically you want to almost selectively play this ship with two front guns. If you are finding yourself in a situation where you can utilize all three turrets, by all means you should be doing that. Just understand you have an exposed citadel. You can get citadel. You are a cruiser. I can't say that enough. This ship really isn't a kiter, though, if I'm being absolutely honest with you. And the reason for that is not only because the turret firing angles are shit, but your turret traverse time is rather garbage. I believe your turret traverse time, if I am reading this correctly, I don't even see where it's at. I have to really, oh, here it is. It is a little bit better than the Riga at 27.7 seconds. Riga is abysmal at 32, and no one's really kiting in the Riga. So please don't try to use the Tianjin as a kiting ship. It's not. Basically, with its armor scheme too, with the turtleback, only the 25mm nose on the upper portion is what you can be overmatched, or what can be overmatched, and your 40mm deck. This is a full all or nothing in the fray sort of ship. You want to be nose in. Very similar or very identical to that of a Soviet style cruiser play style, or heavier cruiser. That's how kind of what you want to play in the Tianjin as well. You don't want to be kiting in this thing. But again, if you find yourself in situations like this where really no one's paying much mind to you, you know where everyone is, you can utilize your third turret. And again, 9 shells going down range, more so than 6 shells, is always going to translate to more damage dealt usually, right? Again, we're seeing that the target changes course ever so slightly. My shells do get thrown off course because they're so accurate with the spotter plane up. All you have to do is slightly maneuver, because these shells are basically going where you want them to go, okay? Again, you can easily counter the Tianjin by knowing where it's at and angling to it, because it only is 220mm guns at the end of the day. They really don't have overmatch. I think if we are really going to be splitting hairs here and talking about overmatch with the armor piercing, it's only 15mm, so that's not going to be any notable threshold to be covering here, even with destroyers. Like, no. Use HE on them, please. You know, again, this ship does have secondaries. Really not worth talking about, just like there's not worth talking about with the Riga. You have them. Bleh, terrible. Occasional fires. That's about it. Anti-aircraft, again, it is a little bit better than the Riga, mainly coming in with the medium range at 4 kilometers rather than 3.5, and your medium DPS is going to be a little bit higher, but your long range DPS is a little bit lower. Again, you have the 4+1 flag count, so pretty identical AA values. There's really not going to be any difference. The only real difference you're going to see is if you utilize that defensive AA fire consumable, then you will probably shoot down more planes than not, but more often than not, you will not be shooting down planes, especially prohibiting any strikes, or you know, basically dissuading the carrier not to go and strike you, because it's not going to be anything. Like, if I'm a carrier, I'm laughing at this thing, I'm striking this thing, okay? Airstrike, you do have the ASW airstrike. Thank fuck you are a heavy cruiser, so you don't have to rely on the depth charges and sailing over the ship, so you can support your allied submarines and destroyers by dropping ASW on the target with the depth charges. Again, only a max range of 7 kilometers, so you have to position your ship accordingly, or the submarine has to very much fuck up and overextend himself and is lit for you, so you can go ahead and drop that. Again, I've already talked on the consumables with the Bungo spotter plane. it really is a nice gimmick to have because it's going to elevate your gameplay and you're going to get better performance out of your main battery gun, because the more accurate you are, theoretically speaking, the more shells you're going to be landing on target, which is going to be translating to more damage dealt, which that is what's going to be your team utility, is going to be doing the damage on enemy ships and supporting your allied ships. You don't have the Riga radar, which is very nice. I believe your concealment on the Riga is at 12.1 kilometers, and you have a 12-kilometer radar. So theoretically speaking, the stealth radar there is pretty much there by the time the ship renders in. You only have 100 meters or so for the ship to travel until it can spot you. They're probably going to do so. Again, the Riga radar's only lasting 15 seconds. Still, though, it's nice to know who you're fighting and where they're at all times, and give some information to your team. So again, you see that's the team utility that you are missing if you are taking the Tianjin over the Riga. You know, I do find myself bow tanking a lot, and when I'm fighting enemy cruisers, that's when I will go ahead and sway out with my rear turret. Again, it depends on the enemy cruiser I'm fighting. If I know they have improved armor-piercing ricochet angles, or their penetration is insane, like a Riga at closer ranges, a Stalingrad, a Des Moines, those kind of things, then I'm probably not going to be utilizing my third turret, but I will be utilizing that third turret against ships like the Rune, for example, that I know he's already going to be having to show me immense amount of broadside in order to get all three of his turrets to bear. So I'm going to go ahead and match him with that. Plus the spotter plane active is going to translate to me doing some pretty spicy damage to him in return. Now here's a Kansas. Obviously the Kansas, not a good ship at Jacques, and we are going to go ahead and fist him because we're just going to run at him. We're going to close distance and close ranks with our icebreaker, and we're going to slightly angle because we're going to want him to be angled in or shoot and entice him to shoot our upper belt, which we're going to be getting ricochets on that because his 406s can't overmatch that. I believe we are pecking a 30 millimeter upper belt, or is it a 35? I think it's a 30 millimeter over belt, which theoretically speaking, he will struggle to deal damage with. He can overmatch it, I think, if my calculations are correct, but if it's angled appropriately at that 30-degree auto bounce ricochet angle, or just shooting my belt armor in general that's already thick, he's going to have a hard time getting through that. Again, these are 406s, so we have to play around that. And again, there's a good example of auto-baiting him into the side of our ship and turning in when you see the muzzle flash. We can kind of bait him into doing that, and there you go. Obviously, the secondary is coming to clutch with us, and our allied ships coming in clutch with us. So we're going to get the occasional fire on him, and then we're going to stick with the armor piercing, and we're going to chunk the superstructure errors of the Kansas. The Kansas has what I like to call these cheeks, not in his hull, but in his superstructure, where his secondaries and AA mounts kind of flex out on his fat ass hull. So we're going to go ahead and shoot those portions, or try to get the AP penetration on that, and sure enough, we do. We take him down. Now, obviously, this game is losable. We are losing. And it's also at the same time, it is winnable, but certain things have to happen. One, I think that's a West Virginia 44, has to kill that enemy. I think it's a battleship. Yeah, enemy battleship there. He has to kill him, and then our Kearsarge has to spot not only the Black, but the Mahan. If we can eliminate both those ships, I am convinced that I can beat the Azumo on a one-on-one. So that's kind of my initial strategy here. But again, we're going to have to see how it plays out. So I know I'm kind of strapped for time on this video, so I'm going to go ahead and give you my final thoughts of the Tianjin. I, like I've said previously in this video, adore this ship. I play this ship actually a lot, and I am gravitated towards this ship for two reasons. One, this ship is pretty damn exclusive. Not a whole lot of people play that, and I like playing ships that not everyone is playing. You see the common ships, you see the Seattle, you see the Buffalo, you see the Riga, right, played, for an example. You see those popular cruisers played all the time, and that's just the tech line cruiser variant. You see a lot of premium ships too played at this year, but you don't really see the Tianjin. And I can only conclude that people want radar over the Bungo spotter plane, and that this thing is pretty exclusive. And I believe that is, I think I'm right with that, with those two statements. I just don't think a lot of people know about this ship, and I just don't think a lot of people, I think a lot of people rather have radar because they'd rather see, and get that information, because in random battles, you can't rely on your teammates. That's just a fact, and it sucks, right? It does suck. I wish that you could, but you can't. Sadly, if you're playing alone, you can't rely on your teammates. You have no VC, no one's talking, no one's communicating. They're only in it for damage and fucking around. There are two audiences of this game. There is the more competitive scene, like that I would like to believe that I'm part of in regards of random battles, and there's more of like the shooty boats, not really a whole lot of strategy. They just play this game to kick back and relax and fuck around. At the end of the day, it's your choice how you want to play this game. You really can't get mad at other players. I mean, I am the king of people that, I bitch here time and time again, which I really shouldn't. But again, it's competitive. You want to win. And it kind of sucks when some people just throw away their ships and don't really have a lot of strategy involved. But I digress. Going back to the Tianjin, though, the package you get here is awesome. The main battery guns are incredibly effective. The hull is relatively tanky, again, air quotes, because it is a cruiser. And the gimmick is kind of interesting with this Bungo spotter plane. I actually like it. I think it's an interesting gimmick, and giving it, on cruisers rather than just battleships, so it's not as exclusive, is quite nice. I think it opens a whole other door of possibilities for cruisers when they have this gimmick. And you could see, even when I'm closing ranks and closing distance, obviously I talked about this with your icebreaker and belt armor, it turns out that you're landing more shells on target, so you're doing more damage. And I really do like, again, with the penetration of the guns, of the 220mm gun variants, you're doing more damage. And the Azumo is kind of getting a little brazen and a little arrogant because he's trying to utilize all 3 turrets. And he's still showing me enough of an angle to go ahead and penetrate. Obviously, that was a little low because I shot his thick belt armor and he is slightly angled, so I should have aimed a little bit more on the nose to get those penetrations on the nose. As you see, I make the correct fix here, so I can actually go ahead and get penetrations on his nose. But again, the weakness of this ship is when you get into these really thick brawling like scenarios, the turret traverse. I think I would have killed this guy, I really do, but because the turret traverse is just so inherently bad, like it is on the Riga, I can't depress my guns, and I can't get my guns to bearing quick enough because I'm busy maneuvering and dodging the Azumo with the ram, because I physically can't ram this ship if I want to try to win. And yeah, we end up losing this game, sadly, because the Mahan, he played it smart. I'll give him credit. He ran away, and the Azumo, again, rear turret to bear. Thought you could score some citadels. We can't. We're just not quite there with the penetration. We still get good damage, but we're not quite there with the penetration to score the citadel ribbon, and the enemy team points us out. All in all, really good game. I think this game, or both games, highlighted what this ship can do and what it can't do, its strengths and its weaknesses. And this is a ship that I can utterly endorse because I love this ship to death. This is a phenomenal ship, and hopefully you guys will like this ship too. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in on today's video. Like always, have a good one, and I'll catch you in the next one. Have a good day, guys, and peace out.